146. It's all sing. Have thine own way, Lord. Have thine own way. Thou art the potter, I am the clay. me and after thy will, while I am waiting, yielded and still. Have thine own way, Lord. Have thine own way. Search me and try me, Master, today. Whiter than snow, Lord, wash me just now, as in the presence only I bow. Have thine own way, Lord. Have thine own way. O Lord, my being, absolute sway. Fill with thy Spirit, till all shall see Christ only always living in me.
Let's pray. Dear Father in heaven, as we begin this worship hour, help us to focus on you. Thank you for this building where we can gather as a church without fear of outside authorities. And we ask that everything said and done is in a manner well-pleasing in thy sight. In Jesus Christ's name, amen.
Amen. Next song will be number 194. 194. Sing the wondrous love of Jesus, sing his mercy and his grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, he'll prepare us a place. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout victory. While we walk the pilgrim pathway, clouds will overspread the sky. But when traveling days are over, not a shadow of sun. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing and rejoicing when we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. Let us be true and faithful, trusting, serving every day. Just one when we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. If you'd like to mark your books of the Song of Invitation after Brother Si's invitation this evening, it'll be number 347. 347. After marking that, if you would, turn to number 249. If you'd like to do so, please stand. Wait a minute. That may not be the right song. Let me back up on that. Number 359. Number 359. I heard an old story, how a Savior came from glory, how He gave His life on Calvary to save a wretch like me. I heard about His groaning, of His precious blood upon me. Then I repented of my sins and won the victory. Oh, victory in Jesus, my Savior forever. He sought me and bought me with His redeeming blood. He loved me ere I knew Him, and all my love is to Him. He plunged me to victory beneath the cleansing flood. I heard about His healing, of His cleansing power revealing, how He made the lame to walk again, and caused the blind to see. And then I cried, dear Jesus, come and heal my broken spirit. I then obeyed His last command and gained the victory. Oh, victory in Jesus, my Savior forever. He sought me and bought me with His redeeming blood. He loved me ere I knew Him, and all my love is to Him. He plunged me to victory beneath the cleansing flood. I heard about a mansion He has built for me in glory, and I heard about the street of gold beyond the crystal sea, about the angels singing, and the old redemption story, and some sweet day I'll sing out there the song of victory. Oh, victory
Good evening, everybody. It's good to see all of y'all here. Tonight, in my invitation, I wanted to talk a little bit about fellowship and the importance of what we have here. And as I was coming up with this invitational topic, I was really drawing blanks. I was trying to think and couldn't come up with a topic. I was just having one of those brain fart moments where the harder I thought, the harder it was to come up with a topic. But I knew, in a funny way that God does it, that He would just kind of put it in front of me. And the way He did so was through a question that I get asked commonly from acquaintances and friends that might not be super deep in their beliefs, and they might be a little lukewarm. And that question comes when I ask them to come to church. Our doors are always open, and I say, I ought to just come and see how you are, just see what you can learn. And their question sometimes is, why must I go to church? Can't I worship alone? Can't I study and serve by myself at home? And when I've been asked this question before, I was kind of taken aback. I knew the answer, but I just didn't have it locked and loaded to give it to them. And so I thought about that, and I really need an answer. So I wanted to answer that tonight in detail. That way, the next time I'm asked that question, or maybe if you're asked that question, we can give a good answer, an important answer. So my answer to that now, when I go back to that person, would be, well, of course you can, if you have no other choice, but that shouldn't be all that you do. You have to be involved in fellowship in some way, because we're not called to go to church, but we're called to be the church. And how do we be the church? Well, joining in worship with other believers is the very first step. And everything else kind of comes with that. And to go along with this, worship's not about what we get out of it as much as it is what we give during our worship, during our fellowship. Now, through songs of praise and offerings, we honor God with His amazing love and His amazing sacrifice that He's doing. And although it's not about us, there's still a lot of benefits that we can gain from fellowship and the people around us, such as understanding and seeing the unity that we have here, and seeing that we're not alone in this uphill battle against sin. We grow stronger through knowledge and example, and we are able to provide encouragement and receive encouragement from the other people around us. We grow stronger through knowledge and example, so we grow stronger through knowledge by hearing the word through people that may be more knowledgeable than us, and through just hearing different people's points of view and perspective and ideas. We grow stronger through example by seeing the people around us and how they live and how they encourage one another, how they encourage me. And just to give you a silly example, Easton and I, most of you know Easton, about a year and a half ago, we got into playing chess. And we were both learning the game, so we would only play with each other. And we played for about a month. We'd go back and forth. He'd win, I'd win, he'd win, I'd win. And then we were like, we're tired of playing with each other. Let's get our friends to play. So we taught them how to play, and all the friends would play chess. And eventually we got to where we thought we were really, really good at chess. And we all thought we were. And I really did think I was good at chess. Maybe I could be a grandmaster one day. I don't know about that. But I decided one day I was going to get on chess online. And you can play against people online that you can't see and you don't know. And so I was like, I'm going to get on there. And I'm going to win just like I always do. So I made my account and got on there, and I was playing on the computer. And, man, I got whooped. Over and over again, I got whooped. I won here and there, but there's no better way to put it. I was not really as good at chess as I thought that I was. And that's because I was only playing against new players and people around me. I was kind of playing by myself. And that made me realize if I were to only ever worship alone or study alone or serve alone, I may think I'm doing a really great job, and I might not be doing as good a job as I think I am. And that's why it's good to have examples around you that can hold you accountable and can show you what being a good Christian looks like. And we can look to Jesus for that example too. And to finish off, I want to see what God feels about the fellowship. So I'm going to look at a couple verses. The first verse is in Proverbs chapter 27, verse 17. And this is a classic verse. I'm sure most, if not all of you, know this one. Iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another. And it's really self-explanatory. As iron sharpens iron, we sharpen each other and help each other to grow and be better. And another verse that I wanted to go over is in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 24 through 25. And this really details what God thinks about our joining in fellowship. It reads, "And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more you see the day drawing near." And the day draws near every day. So, it says it plain and simple. We cannot neglect to meet with each other, as is the habit of some, because we're here to stir up each other to love and good works. As one stick is weak, a bundle of sticks is strong. And the amazing brothers and sisters that make up this fellowship here, they're here for each other. They're here for me, and they're here for you. So if there's anything that this fellowship can help you with, or you might be ready to give your life to Christ, we invite you to come up as we stand and sing.
We will follow Jesus, standing by the right, holding up his hand in the thickest fight, listening for his orders, ready to obey. Who will follow Jesus, serving him today? Who will follow Jesus? Who will make reply? I am on the Lord's side, Master, here am I. Who will follow Jesus? Who will make reply? I am on the Lord's side, Master, here am I. Who will follow Jesus in life's busy ways, working for the Master, giving him the praise, earnest in his vineyard, honoring his laws, faithful to his counsel, watchful for his cause. Who will follow Jesus? Who will make reply? I am on the Lord's side, Master, here am I. Who will follow Jesus? Who will make reply? I am on the Lord's side, Master, here am I. Who will follow Jesus in his work of love, leading others to him, lifting praise above? Courage, faithful servant, in his word receive. On our side forever will his Savior be. Who will follow Jesus? Who will make reply? I am on the Lord's side, Master, here am I. Who will follow Jesus? Who will make reply? I am on the Lord's side, Master, here am I.
Sarah texted Michelle to ask about Tom, and she wrote back, he is still in neurology critical care at Vanderbilt. They're trying to find a rehab place nearer to Fayetteville. We're limited because of his insurance plan. Thank you for praying. Please continue. He's in much better spirits the last couple of days. Hopefully they'll be able to help him become partially mobile. So that's the update on Tom from Michelle. Some of you, we've had several people join us, probably since they used to be members, and well, they're members, but since they used to attend with us regularly. Tom was a preacher and just an excellent student of the Bible, a great Bible class teacher, and they both struggled with health problems, and sometimes she would be down for a while and he would take care of her, and then sometimes he would be down, and lately they just haven't really been able to get out much at all, and so they've basically been shut in, and she takes care of him. And the last time we saw them, he got down on the floor and she had helped get him up. He wasn't able to hardly get around at all. So I guess it's just obviously gotten worse and worse. So that's the kind of situation with, in case you don't know who we're talking about, Tom and Michelle. John chapter 19. John chapter 19. Before we go further into the chapter, I want to take just a moment to touch on something that has already come up once in the text and is going to come up a couple of other times, but I'd rather get into it now than be interrupted as we go through the narrative, and that is this the Passover. So back in verse 28 of chapter 18, you'll recall that it says they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning. They hid themselves and did not enter the governor's headquarters, so they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover. And we know that this the crucifixion of Jesus coincides with the Passover, and that's not accidental. Paul refers to Jesus as our Passover lamb. So he fulfills the Passover. The blood, remember, they had to choose a lamb, and then the lamb was slain at sundown, and then they had to eat the Passover meal, and they took the blood, at least in the Exodus, they put it on the doorpost, and then they were saved from the plague that Ben's going to talk about. And I won't say anything else about that because that's Sunday morning. So if you Sunday morning at 10, we'll be looking at the last plague. But that was a history of the Passover. And then they're concerned at some level about not crossing into the governor's property because they didn't want to be defiled, because they wanted to be able to partake of this feast, which we talked about the irony of that last time. Well, this comes up a couple of other times. One is in chapter 19, verse 14. Jesus is about to be sentenced. And it says, now it was the day of preparation of the Passover at about the 6th hour. So John gives us some references here. If you have a footnote there for that 6th hour, it says about noon. So noon on the day of preparation of the Passover. Okay. Now later in chapter 19, it says, this is when Jesus has already died on the cross. And on verse 31, since it was the day of preparation, so the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day, the Jews asked Pilate that their legs might be broken and to be taken away. And then they rested. Verse 42 says, because the Jewish day of preparation, they laid Jesus in this tomb that was close by. And then chapter 20 begins on the first day of the week. So the thing that I'm going to mention about this is that there is some dispute about what day of the week we are talking about here. It's not of critical importance, in my opinion. So it's not like we have to settle this matter. Some people have really put a lot of time into studying this. I was meeting with one of the speakers who's coming in the Wednesday night series, Norm Webb Sr., and we were talking, and somehow this subject came up, and he's done a lot of study on it. And he's put so much study into it and thought that he offered to come sometime if we want him to and present his studies on this subject of simply the question, what day of the week? Now you might think, well, why does it really matter what day of the week? And What's the traditional day of the week that Jesus was executed? Friday, right? So it was called Good Friday, right? Traditionally called it Good Friday, the day that Jesus was crucified. Now, the reason why that, based on what we just read, why would we assume that Jesus was crucified on a Friday? Right, so Saturday's the Sabbath, and it said that they wanted to go ahead and break the criminal's legs so they could die, so they would not be there on the Sabbath day. So the idea is that they wanted to get this ugly business over with, and not, because on the Sabbath day they couldn't do any work, and they didn't want to have them just left hanging on the crosses over the Sabbath, so they said, can we kind of get this thing moving along? And when they came, Jesus was already dead. So then they took him down, and since the Sabbath was approaching, they buried him. So the traditional view is that all that happens on a Friday. What is the one kind of issue or problem that comes up, would you guess, with it being a Friday? Maybe it's a question you've had. So there's one thing about like how people count days. Yes, that's going to be part of it. What can anybody think of a problem that comes up with it being on Friday?
How does that make it 3 days?
Yeah. Let's go to Matthew chapter 12. If you didn't hear her, she said, how does that fit with 3 days? Well, one answer to how does it fit with 3 days is the way the Jews count time. That's what Sharon was mentioning. We had this problem with the kids when we were growing up. I don't know if Sam would remember it, but it was when you were pretty young. We finally had to make a rule about it. We would be talking about, we're going to leave to go to Big Mama's on a certain day, right? And so then they would say, as the time got closer, how many days till we leave, right? And Jack would say, we're going in 4 days. And Sabrina would say, no, it's 3 days. And they would start arguing about how many days it was. And it all depends on how you count, right? So if we're going to go on Sunday from today, we could say, well, today's 1, then 20. You said, oh, you start tomorrow as 1 and then 2. So you could have, it was a never-ending debate. So we finally made a rule at our table. You could not argue about how many days it was till we leave. Like that conversation has to end because every time it would come up, it would turn into an argument. Do you remember that at all? Yeah, you were pretty small. That's how far back the rule went. And Sam doesn't even remember it because we finally we got no more arguing about that. But there is this question of, okay, so if you have, he's crucified on Friday. So if you count that as day 1, then you get Saturday as day 2, Sunday as day 3 is how that's how you arrive at 3 days if you're counting that way. But notice what Matthew says, and Jesus says actually in Matthew 12 about the sign of Jonah in verse 40. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Now this is the verse that really got Norm Webb Sr. thinking about it, what he told me. He said even when he was a boy, he would worry about this and think about it. And he just thought, how is it possible that you can get 3 days and 3 nights between Friday and Sunday morning? You can get as creative as you want with counting, and you have a hard time getting 3 nights between Friday afternoon and Sunday morning. No matter how you count it, you can't get 3 days and 3 nights. So there is an alternative explanation for this, which is back to our passage in John. It has to do with the Passover. And I've seen preachers, when I was growing up, I've seen people give a presentation on this. I can't remember if it was here or somewhere else. But again, you can study this, and you come to this conclusion, that it says in John that it was the day, let me find it here, verse 14 of chapter 19. Now it was the day of preparation of the Passover. So we'll come back to that, but let's go back to Leviticus 23. Leviticus 23. We're not going to spend all night on this unless you guys want to. I mean, we can dive into it deeper and deeper. I'm just going to give you kind of a thumbnail sketch of this, the issue, so you can think about it. In Leviticus 23, this is a passage all about the various feasts that the people were to keep. And there's one after another. There's quite a few of these. You have the regular old, my pages won't turn here. Verse 3 talks about the actual Sabbath. This is the weekly Sabbath. It came up, obviously every week you have Sabbath. Then the next one, starting in verse 4, talks about the Passover. These are the appointed feasts of the Lord, the holy convocations which you are proclaim at the time appointed for them. In the first month, this is verse 5, on the 14th day of the month at twilight, that's the Lord's Passover. On the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread of the Lord. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall not do any ordinary work, but you shall present a food offering. So, to kick off the week of unleavened bread, you have the 14th, the evening of the 14th is the Passover, and then the next day begins the week of unleavened bread, and that first day, the 15th of the month, the first day of that week, is they were to refrain from doing any work, any ordinary work. So, there's other ones here where you could just read down through the rest of this, and there's others where they had to rest at various times. And there's other examples of this in the book of Leviticus. So the other argument goes that you have the weekly Passover, the weekly Sabbath, which was every Saturday. Every Saturday you had to rest. But that when it came time for the Passover, you have the evening of the 14th, the lamb is slaughtered, and on the 15th day you do no work to kick off this week of unleavened bread, whatever that day that 15th fell on. And so it is suggested by some that that is the Sabbath that this is referring to. Let's go back to John 19 now. There's a little clue that maybe points to that. You might have noticed it when we read it just a moment ago. So they're getting ready for the Passover. We know that. In verse 14, it says it was the day of preparation for the Passover. And then over on verse 31, it says it was a day of preparation, so the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day. Now, what that might mean is this is not an ordinary Sabbath. This is a special Sabbath. It sounds like it from the text. There's something special about this particular Sabbath. If it was the Sabbath rest, if that's what we can call that began the week of unleavened bread, then that might be what John's referring to. So it's possible, and some would suggest almost required by that passage in Matthew, that this would have been Jesus was crucified on Thursday, was buried on a Friday, which was a Sabbath because of the Passover, not the weekly Sabbath. So you would, in that case, because of the way the days fell, you would have had back-to-back Sabbaths. You would have had a Sabbath on Friday, another Sabbath on Saturday, and then Sunday comes around. And if you do the math, that works. You can get 3 days and 3 nights between Thursday and Sunday. You can fit 3 nights in there and 3 days in there. And so that's kind of view number 2. And there's an alternate view of this. If you just Google it and read about it, there's a third view that says it was Wednesday. And similar kind of reasoning, but it's all because of when does that Passover, when does the 15th of the month fall? And if that Passover was on a Thursday, or if that started on Thursday, you can kind of work it out that way too. Depends on when. Back to the whole argument, how do we count the days and nights, right? I went down for lectures one year to Florida College, and one of the Bible faculty, who's written a commentary on Hebrews, one of his lectures was on this question. He devoted the entire lecture to simply what day of the week was Jesus crucified on. He argued for Friday. So he had charts and everything where he tried to show that it was Friday. So Norm Webb, who's coming here, has a whole lesson on why it's Thursday. So I think you could have a very, very serious Bible students who study this issue in depth and arrive at different conclusions. I don't know. I'm going to open up for comment here in just a minute. All I would say is what we know for a fact is it was the first day of the week when they went to the tomb and found it empty. That's emphasized and spelled out in black and white. It's not quite as clear what day he was crucified. I think it could have been Thursday or Friday, and I'm not really sure. It's my opinion about it. I don't really know which day it was. I don't think it's crucial to us for our faith to figure that out. But for Norm, at least, it was a problem for him because he was trying to understand how does 3 days and 3 nights fit into that timeline. So it was helpful to him to see an answer to that mystery that made it all make sense. And that kind of settled his mind on the issue. Like, okay, well, now I can understand it. Now it makes sense to me. So I just wanted to share that with you. Any thoughts or questions? Somebody want to add anything or ask anything? Yes.
Also, if you want to further complicate the issue, you could also add in the fact that the modern week that we have, Sunday through Saturday, that's actually goes back to 321 AD. So actually, from what I found is that they actually had around an 8-day a week at that time. So I mean, you really dig too deep into it and get too caught up in it. Really.
Wow. And I've heard of times when various emperors would have to add some time in to make it all work out. They added a month to make it work out. And so it's really tough. I've seen people be as specific as saying, and they did in this article I read, they said it was on AD 30, the 15th fell on a Thursday, and on AD 32, the 15th fell on a Friday. So kind of depending on which day you choose, you can almost narrow down to exactly what year, because there's even some question about that. I don't know how in the world you can back up 2,000 years and be precise about what day of the week a certain month and all that fell on. You'd have to do a lot of math to come to that conclusion. And but clearly some people have put a lot of time and study into this question. Anybody else? Thoughts or comments or questions about it? Something to add or?
I mean, it just seems like a really difficult thing to think about because the concept of the day is the turn of the earth's orbit, right? But the concept of keeping up with the days is man-made. But this doesn't seem like it really matters all that.
Right. Yeah. I agree. I think we're okay either way. I don't know that it would, if somebody felt like they were convicted that it was Thursday and somebody else is just confident it's Friday, I think, we can agree to disagree on that and be just fine, in my opinion. Right. First day of the week is emphasized. That's clear and it's spelled out in black and white, and we can have confidence. When I was a young man and I was doing a lesson on this when I was a student in college, and what I decided to do is a harmony of the Gospels on the crucifixion and the last week of Jesus' life, basically. And so I studied. I got it all together. I took everything I could find from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and tried to harmonize it. And I went and preached this lesson. And as I got down to the conclusion, I said, and then on Monday morning, the ladies came to the tomb and they found it empty. And I didn't, somebody met me at the back after. They said, it was not Monday. It was Sunday, the first day of the week. I'm an idiot. I said Monday morning. But what did I said, okay, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And I was thinking like Monday's the first day of the week. Because sometimes, depending on, you think about Monday being like the first day of the week. But it was Sunday was the first day of the week. And we know that's when Jesus rose from the dead. So, all right, we'll go back to it. Anybody else have anything else to add? Questions about it? Okay, so now when we come to that, we're just going to keep rolling. When we get to those, we won't stop and discuss those that timestamp that John gives us. So last week, we got down to just the first few verses of chapter 19, where Pilate has taken Jesus and has flogged him. We see in verse 1. We talked about the horror of that. And then he brought him out to them, and in verse 4, and he said, see, I'm bringing him out that you may know that I find no guilt in him. And I think what he means by that, as I said, is that he's kind of proven that Jesus is innocent, because not only did he question him, but now he's punished him, and nothing's come out of it. Jesus hasn't confessed to any crimes, so he's clearly innocent. And Pilate's going to say this several times, that I find no guilt in him. Pilate says to them in verse 5, behold the man. And you almost imagine he's expecting them to be satisfied. Like maybe when they see Jesus and they see what has happened to him, that they will let this thing go. But they don't. They shout out, crucify him, crucify him. And he says in verse 6, you take care of it, right? which again flies in the face of their whole argument that, well, we're not allowed to do any of this. I mean, he's basically just telling them, he's giving them permission. You take him and you crucify him. I don't want anything to do with this. But they answer, we have a law. And why do they say Jesus must die according to their law? He claimed to be the Son of God. Does Pilate laugh this off? No, it's disturbing to him, right? In fact, it says he became all the more afraid or frightened, which means he was already frightened. Isn't that interesting? Something about his encounter with Jesus has given him a bad feeling about what's going down. So he's got a feeling of fear and dread, and he's trying to get this thing to come to a conclusion, and he's trying to get this off of his plate. And, so when he hears that, he's even more frightened. Like he doesn't know, there's something about Jesus. So he goes back inside now with Jesus. And what does he want to know from Jesus?
Where are you from?
Where are you from? Why is that the logical question to ask? Based on what he's just been told. Yeah. He wants to know, where are you from? He wants to know who he's talking to. At least on the surface, he wants to know. And how does Jesus explain to him where he's from and all of that? Nothing. This surprises Pilate, or Pilate exasperates him, right? And he says, you don't know, I'm like holding your life in my hand. How are you not going to answer my questions? Like I've got the power to release you or have you killed. And what does Jesus say? Yeah, you're only able to do any of this because God's allowing it, number one, and the authority that you have comes from God. Now, we will learn that in Romans 13, that the authorities that exist are instituted by God. The rulers of governments act with God's authority. The authority that he is using is authority that was given to him from God, and also he's only able to do any of this because it's God's will that it's going to happen. But then Pilate adds Jesus adds an interesting second half of that statement. Therefore, yeah. What do you make of that?
Pilate's just executed the judgment. The people have hatred and bitterness against him, and they're going to go along.
Right. Yes. Yes. Right. Right. You didn't hear what she said. That the people who have turned him over should know who Jesus is. Pilate's not a Jew. He's a Roman official. And he's really just doing the job that he was authorized to. He is authorized to sit in that judgment seat by God. Now, is he doing it fairly and justly? No. So his crime is that he's about to condemn an innocent man who's already said he's innocent. That's a pretty big crime, but not as big as the Jews rejecting and hating and scheming and plotting to kill their Messiah, who they had seen the signs he had done and all that. So the guilt that the people who brought him to Pilate has is actually bigger than the guilt that Pilate has, although they're both guilty in this sense. Nobody's good in this whole picture.
Then on the cross he says, forgive them.
Yeah, well, I think he says that as he's being nailed to the cross. And I think he's talking about those Roman soldiers, I suspect. That's what I've always understood, that it's these soldiers are just doing their job, and they don't even know. But of course that applies. I mean, maybe you could expand that to apply to everybody. But I've always wondered if maybe he's talking there about the Roman soldiers who are crucifying him, that not knowing what they were actually doing. Anybody else? Somebody else raise their hand? Yes, Lee.
This probably really doesn't matter, and just popped in my head when we read over this verse 1 again. So this flogging is not the scourging before crucifixion, right?
I think it is.
Well, why would he give deliver such a severe punishment for somebody that he's selling as innocent?
The only reason I can see is that he's trying to convince them in verse 4 that he has done a thorough job of examining him and hoping that that will be sufficient. That's my understanding. If you're right that that's not it, then he gets another one, right?
That's what I was thinking, that maybe this, because I was thinking back to like when some of the other disciples were, that warned them not to do it. I don't think they took them out and beat them. I don't think they scourged them and things like that. Maybe turns where you get hung up, but I don't know. It just seems weird that he would deliver such a severe punishment for somebody that he's telling is innocent and, to let him go.
Yes, and one thing I was reading about that, a commentary or a note somewhere about this, and they said, because of what you're saying, that perhaps he had already decided here, like that basically the ball's already rolling toward crucifixion, but I'm not sure, but somebody else noticed the same thing, like, why would you do this now? And I'm not sure. It's a good question. Anybody else have a thought about that? Why in verse 1 Jesus is flogged, and is that the same thing as the scourging that?
Maybe that was part of the interrogation.
Yeah.
Using, pain, inflicting pain, trying to get people to admit their guilt.
Yes, I think that's right. I think the question that Lee's asking is that also the same thing as once they were sentenced to be crucified, they were usually scourged and then crucified. So
in Matthew and other Gospels, they actually used that he was scourged and then crucified. That's why I didn't really think about it either.
I hope so.
Just a different word.
Man, I hope that it's the same event, because that would be even worse if he had to endure that twice.
Well, you're talking about verse 1 saying flog, mine says scourge.
Oh, okay.
So then Pilate took Jesus and scourge.
Okay.
Well, since they weren't Jews, they didn't know who he really was. And maybe they're thinking, he can't be as what David is thinking. But maybe we can give him a big enough punishment that he'll finally admit that he's not what he says he is. So we can kind of get him out of this.
Right.
We can move along. That's obviously not what happened, because he's going to get the hand at the end of the day. That's not what happened.
That's right. Both things. So what you're saying goes along with what Debbie was saying. It used to be a practice of interrogation to sort of torture people just to prove either they would either admit to what they did, or oftentimes what they did is they admitted to things they hadn't done, or they wouldn't admit to anything, and you would say, well, now we know he did it because we nearly killed him and he never did admit to it, so he must be innocent. So it's possible this was just an interrogation process. Either way, to your point, we know all of this is inevitable because it's been foretold, and regardless of what their intentions, it's all happening because this is God's will. Yes. Pilate is playing politician through the whole thing. He's a corrupt person. Kelly sent me a good article from Wayne Jackson on Pilate. If you're interested in reading more about him, I'll be glad to share it with you. He refers to some historians that lived around that time and some things they said about him. And he was known for being basically a cruel, unjust. There's another passage in Luke where Jesus said that Pilate had killed some Galileans who had worshipped and mingled their blood with their sacrifice. And, so he's really not a good person. So we're not trying to paint him in too sympathetic of a light, for sure. And he's probably just playing politics during a lot of this. So yeah, he could very well have been just trying to get the favor of the Jews. Yeah, we're coming right to that. That's coming up next.
That just goes to show how special his interaction with Jesus really was.
Yeah.
He was really, truly that cool.
Yeah.
He was afraid.
Yes.
That just goes to show you he knew something really was going on.
We can be sure he never met a man like Jesus. And there's no telling how many people he had put to death. But there was something about Jesus that was different, which is not surprising, right? That's not surprising. But it, obviously, to Ashley's point, for a hardened kind of unjust person to have fear in him, he really had an encounter with Jesus.
Part of that fear could have been from what his wife told him about
Yes.
her dream, in the account of Matthew. So.
That's right. In Matthew's account, it says that his wife told him that don't have anything to do with this just man, for I have suffered many things tonight.
So he could be adding the two together and say there's a common son of God and the wife to those dreams, So.
He's wishing this was somebody else's problem. Yes, for sure. You wish that all that would add up to some faith. And some people have tried to kind of rewrite the story to be like, well, maybe Pilate came to faith in Jesus. There have been that suggestion. But there's nothing in the text that tells us that he actually became a believer as a result of this. It would be nice. And I hope that he did. But there's nothing in the Bible that gives us the evidence of that.
Just how they sent a small army to retrieve them, it may just be an idea of like better safe than sorry in a way, because when they told him that this man's claiming to be the son of God, he was like, well, we better be safe. A small army of these guys. We don't know what he's capable of. And so that time he's probably like, it could be, could not be, I'm not quite there, not quite sure. But
Right. Yep. So then we see in verse 12, Pilate tries to release him again. But now, to Debbie's point, she was trying to help us move along. I appreciate that. If you release him, you are not Caesar's friend, right? Now, they're trying to hit him where it hurts. They know what he cares about. He doesn't care about really right and wrong or justice, but he does care about keeping his boss happy. And basically, all of these Roman officials could be recalled at any time and have their job jerked out from under them. But they served at the pleasure of the emperor, so to speak. So if they can, and remember there were Jews already in Rome, and they had connections. They could complain. And when he said, they say, everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar. In other words, Jesus is posing a threat to the emperor. When he heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement in Aramaic, Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. So about noon, if you look down at your footnote. He said to the Jews, behold your king. Remember how he's kind of sticking with that whole king business. They cried out, away with him, crucify him. And he says, shall I crucify your king? And the chief priests say, we have no king but Caesar. And he delivered him over to them to be crucified. We'll stop right there for this time and resume with the crucifixion. Lord willing, next Wednesday night. Thank you.